Hello. Thanks for coming tonight to learn about water catchment. I'm Niky with SplitPea Edible Landscaping. We are a design to build landscaping company that focuses on earth first processes to help create habitats, responsible habitats in a desert climate for people and pollinators and wildlife. One of the things that we do is utilize, and in that process is utilizes the resources we have when we have them and try to create closed loop systems. And a portion of that is rainwater catchment, even in a desert climate. Before I get too far into that, I do want to just mention that I have never been trained professionally in rainwater catchment. There's not a lot of programs, but I've been playing and failing and succeeding and trialing and taking data for probably 15, 20 years now. And I'm just here today to share some of those things with you. A good place to get started. Okay. And I can get really chatty and fast and loud and excited and sometimes derail and go off. So if anybody feels like that's happening, just, wave your arms in the air and I'll get back on track. Okay. Oh, okay. That's where it happens. Excels in technology. Okay, so before we talk about how to utilize rainwater, how to collect rainwater, let's talk a little bit about where does it go if we don't capture it. We've got this resource coming down from the sky and it's going where? And I'd like to bring Jess up from Soil and Water Conservation to talk a little bit about that.
Hi, so I'm Jess with the Ada Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm coordinating the event for tonight. We help people, landowners, farmers, everybody with better conservation practices. And so rainwater in Idaho is an especially big topic. And where does it go? If we don't capture it, it goes away. We, by either paving over the land or having a lot of erosion, we send a lot of our water downstream. And we use in Idaho, I think it's between 75 and 90% of our drinking water alone comes from the aquifer. So they're really important. And by us sending the water downstream, we're not really doing ourselves any favors with the reclamation. Yeah, it's important that we have that in our system, especially since it is such a big source of our drinking water in our high desert climate, that we actually keep it in the soil and filtering down and, cleansing that water through the aquifer process instead of sending it away, which is why we're here tonight, because we think it's such a big topic, especially as we really urbanize rapidly. The more surfaces that we're paving over, the more water we keep on sending away. So talking about how to capture any of this rainwater is really important as we're developing so quickly.
Thanks. Okay, so now we know that we want to capture it. That's why we're here, because we see a problem. We are trying to fill a need. We are, several years into a drought. We're 2+ years into this last heat dome, where heat dome is when the heat of the ocean water heat kind of is trapped in the atmosphere and creates a dome, and that's why we're so dang hot. That's what I've been told we are calling this heat thing by the people who have studied that. Hey, so let's talk then about how do we capture it and how do we utilize it. And that's what the bulk of our program will be about tonight. They're telling me now that I have to credit everybody I take pictures from. So that's where those came from, the World Wide Web. Okay, so is anyone familiar with permaculture in here? Yeah, a little bit here and there. Permaculture is kind of this symbiotic relationship between humans and nature, the way nature sees it. So like biomimicry, replicating patterns we see in nature, treating nature, stewarding the natural world the way the natural world would want us to steward it based on their systems that are already working. So one of the principles, there are 12 principles in permaculture, and one of them is to observe and interact. And it's one of my favorites and also least favorites because I'm not patient. But this is such a critical point in land stewardship, resource utilization. And so I'm going to come back to this point of observing and interacting several times tonight. So first thing we're going to do, decided we want to capture water on our property. So we're going to get out and we are going to interact in our spaces. Setting up and utilizing these water systems can feel kind of intensive in the beginning, especially if you know, there will be some systems in here that you see that feel elaborate and some that feel very simple, the bucket and drip method, which is perfectly reasonable for water catchment, especially if you're starting off. The system that you end up putting in place long-term will depend on how much you want to commit to changing that system as your space changes, because every year that means a little bit of maintenance or a little bit of something that needs to be adjusted for a new changing climate and land after you've pushed water through it, plants have grown and whatnot. The most successful water catchment systems are given attention to and adjusted over time, but you can start small. So how do we get out and observe and interact? You take the time, you wait. You spend the season paying attention to the areas around your home, feel the soil, watch the plants, watch the wildlife that comes in. Where are things visiting? Oh, good. Maybe in the bottom one. But get down and dirty, get out in your space before you start making decisions about just visual decisions when you step back at your house. Pay attention to what the space is asking of you first. So let's go through kind of a walkthrough. We're going to come and walk through your space and talk about what that might mean. When you're looking around your space, you're going to look for excessive wet areas, excessive dry areas, high areas, low areas, areas that stay shady. One of my favorite tools for watching the sun is your phone, taking pictures every 2 hours in the middle of the summer, and then in spring, summer, fall, and winter. So you have a good idea so that you can start mapping those things out when you're tracking where you might want to place water for winter storage, or place water to hold water so that it doesn't get algae in the summer because of extreme temperatures. Those are all things you want to be observing everything that you think may not be important to know for water catchment. Start a journal. I know that a lot of people say, you know, start a gardening journal and start writing things down, but our lives are so busy these days that if we don't write things in front of us, by the time fall comes, we forgot that our system is broken and it didn't get to 50 feet away and we really needed it to, and then the next season's gone and pretty soon we're like, never mind, that's a lot of work. So write things down so that you can go back and and you're not repeating yourself if you don't have to. Repetition happens. Okay. Paying attention to the trees in your landscape. Are there large trees? And under those large trees, do you have dry soil or do you have really wet soil? And is it compacted? And do you have root systems that are up, or are root systems down and there's plentiful space below there? That's all important for capturing and keeping water in the soil. After a good rain or snow, I recommend to folks, if you've got places that you're thinking, hey, maybe say you have clay soil, maybe you want to create a collection pond because you've got clay soil. Well, dig a little hole right before a rainstorm, see how long it takes to drain. Do that in a couple of different areas so that you can see, is my soil full of organic matter or is it sand and I have excellent drainage, or is it clay and I've got no drainage? Before you can decide what you're going to do with your rainwater catchment and how you're going to collect and get it from point A to point B, you need to know what's happening in the ground to help support you get it there. You're getting it there. Last time we were able to dim the lights up here. Do you remember maybe these back here? Might get weird for a minute. Almost. That's better. Thanks. Is that okay with everybody?
Good job, yeah.
Okay. I'm like squinting at the screen. So what are we looking for with plants when we're walking around our space and assessing where our main water tank might go, or where we want to get the water we are collecting to go to? Who's thriving and who needs more support? These are the same plant. One gets water 4 times a year. The other one gets no water except for from the sky and is up against the sidewalk with radiant heat. Maybe I should figure out how to get this guy who's not thriving but hanging on some water. Is your soil too dry? If you run a hose over it and you've got these giant ravines in there, is the water just seeping and seeping and seeping and going into nowhere? Is your soil dry and cracked? Or is it saturated? Does it smell bad? Is there no oxygen in it? Or is it just right? Do you have coverage? Goldilocks with soil, you know? My volume and speed's okay with everyone? Have you considered your trees? I'm going to talk about trees a lot tonight. I'm probably going to say, have you considered the trees several times? But you know, tree canopies, even in our wettest months, underneath there, especially for of evergreens, are not getting saturated at that ground level because they're protected by their canopies. So paying attention to your trees in the heat of the summer, in the winter when they're not getting water like anything else, and then during spring and fall when those rains are coming also. So how do you get water to your big mature trees and keep them healthy? Maybe that's a great way to utilize your 3 water tanks that you have and collect, and that's 1 supplemental water for the season. 1 supplemental water of anything is still better than pulling it from resources that are not. Okay, so you've walked around your space, you're super excited, you're gonna capture some water. Now what are we gonna do? Anyone? Nothing? We're asking more questions. So we do. We ask lots of questions, we observe, and we interact, and we step back, and we see one rain come through, and then we try something, even if it's a bucket. Maybe you just want to collect 1 bucket and see how long it takes to fill up. And then we step back and we ask more questions. We don't dive all the way in very first without having long-term observation and interaction. So one of the questions we need to ask is, where are we going to get our water from? Where's the nearest catchment opportunity? Typically, that means it's coming from a rooftop or a flat surface or some surface that it can collect water off of. Sometimes it's coming straight from a downspout. Sometimes you might have a drip or a leak on the side of a house. Sometimes you don't have gutters and you've just got a flush of water coming off the rooftop. Get some gutters. Maybe you have landscape runoff. Maybe your runoff is coming from straight over a patio and is washing down the concrete into nothingness, or maybe it's floating down the driveway. Missed opportunities. So where can we collect water from? I already talked about that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Try to install gutters along all rooftop surfaces, but don't think just general home rooftop. If you've got homesteads and you've got chicken coops or sheds for your tools or lean-tos or bike barns or all the cool things people are putting roofs on these days, put some gutters on it and start collecting water from there. This is a portion of my greenhouse, and so I just have a single gutter that goes along the back, and then all that water goes into a collection tank down here, which you'll see another picture of shortly. And then that water feeds the plants inside the greenhouse until it drains. Meaning until it's been used up or the resource is gone. Here, hey, boy, I just have to ask today. So this collects off of this entire, just this twin wall top. Gets collected into this gutter here, gets piped in here, or collected down in here. And then this tank also acts as insulation for the greenhouse both during summer and winter. So I can access from the inside of the greenhouse there to feed all fresh water, all those plants. Let's talk about the tools for holding and directing your rainwater. So we're going to go over, this will probably be the longest portion of we'll go through all of this kind of slow. If anybody needs me to back up a slide, if you want to take pictures instead of notes, just let me know. And I will try to back up. Last time we were not able. Nobody wasn't allowed. Okay. First thing we're going to talk about for our tools is storing water at the source. So that means direct from your runoff point. That means from your rooftop or whatever surface you're collecting water at. Storing water at the source means storing it in troughs, barrels, cisterns, water tanks. Typically, you're storing it for future use, although some folks will fill their bins during a rainstorm and then utilize that as a point to direct things under trees during a rainstorm as well. So it can be used for both immediate and future use. Often they're gravity fed, but again, if you put a pump in, pumps are uphill. They're not my first choice. They usually need filters to be cleaned. Layla, you probably know all about pump and filter nightmares. Anyway, try not to utilize a pump if there are other ways, unless you have the mental bandwidth for that. Often they're used for spot watering or flooding a space. And you can use hoses, tubing, and pipes to help you get through all of that, or to get your water from point A to point B. So I wonder if this works now too. It does. Often when you're collecting from a rooftop, you usually have some sort of downspout, whether that's gutters, a simple gutter system like this one we have here, or really cool systems like this one here, where all the water from this rooftop angle and that section all get filtered into a big holding tank that's sitting on a concrete patio right here. And then once this is full, they have diverters that go straight into with a ball valve that goes straight into the landscape and fill their swales. I'll show you all about this later. It's pretty awesome. And they're in the first stages of utilizing rainwater for their entire landscape. So it's a very slow, painful process, but it will be totally worth it. So here's the ball valve that I was mentioning. After this tank that is over here, it collects all of this water. Then this just fills right now. They turn this ball valve and it all gets released down here. It's just some more pictures of this system. This is their catchment tank that's on the front.
About their system.
Yeah.
Let's say they're not home and there's a lot of rain and they forgot to turn the ball valve to release the water. They have a safety backup.
Yep, it's down. I think we're going to be able to see that in 1 second. We're going to talk about water excess, which is important to have a plan for because we almost always have it and never plan for it because we don't think we are getting much. So we're going to talk about how to direct excess water and what kind of plans to have in place for overflow. So this one has an overflow that then drains out on go ahead.
I'm curious about those ball valves too. Is this particular one in Idaho?
Yeah. North End.
Huh?
North End.
North End. I have a friend who farms in out by Mountain Home, and he has irrigation and stuff. And one of the banes of his existence is frozen valves.
Yeah.
Frozen and broken valves.
Yeah.
And so, especially, and one of the things I'm really worried about is most of our water comes in the winter time.
Right.
And so how do I prevent my various valves from freezing and breaking and
Sure.
so on?
We will talk about some winter catchment care and opportunities and the lack of opportunity also, mostly because of our temperatures. So we'll talk about some of that, and I'll touch on ball valves. This is 2 winters. This will be its 2nd winter. So last winter was their 1st winter and they didn't have any problems, but they were not capturing during, I mean, their tank was full before winter. So yeah, so they ended up draining. Well, we'll talk about that. I'm getting ahead of myself, but remind me, okay, if I don't touch on it again. Here's another tank, same household, but their main catchment tank does not include their overhead patio or their covered patio on their porch. So you don't want to forget about small spaces like that. Again, sheds, covered patios. That the surface area of this covered patio fills this entire tank. This is their overflow for. This is a better visual of the overflow when it gets this tall. I mean, this high up. So when it gets this high, then it overflows down into here. They also have an overflow, or this is how they water. And I think there's an overflow on this back side or another access port or something. They utilize their overflow to fill a pond, tiny pond right here, that they grow food crops in, food and ornamental crops. There's that ball valve again. Maybe we'll just talk about it the whole time. I mean, I don't know enough about, you're just not, I don't know that you'd have such a problem like Big Ag would. You know, and the goal for, if you're collecting water in the winter, there's specific spaces that you have to have that tank so that it can be utilized and not frozen and it doesn't freeze. Now, some folks I have seen put water tanks inside of their garage with very elaborate systems. That is not my jam, freaks me out to have lots of big water tanks inside a building. I hope I get there someday, but right now I'm just gonna keep my stuff on the outside where I need it. So, you know, this spot has radiant heat from their fence, from the patio below. It's completely locked by house and concrete and not natural setting. So that might help keep this guy, I'm guessing that's what allows them to collect, would allow them to collect in the winter if they didn't fill their tank ahead of time, which is awesome. Oh, so then here's another ball valve. The ball valves are great because that allows you to control the flow of the water when it's coming out of the tank, because that will go so fast and then it's gone and you will, you know, lost everything you spent all this time collecting. So placing some sort of strategic stopping and starting, turn on, turn off system is really important when you're going to be utilizing your water tanks. Here is the final end. This is their big water tank, PVC. They turn it on right here. It goes out here, and then this is just on the other side of this. And then you can see that they dug swales, and there's a gate right here. So once this water goes out, and they can control, rocks are here because that flow is so high that it just pushes the soil away. That pressure of that flow is so high that it just pushes the soil away. So they had to slow that flow even more than just there and protect that soil. So then this flows through the landscape and is water from the bottom, supporting deep root systems instead of shallow root systems. It's certainly something you have to spot water with this swale system the first couple of years while you're establishing perennials and shrubs and whatnot, and then it all gets taken care of on the bottom side. Any questions so far? Cool. Rain barrels. Everybody, this is like the thing that gets everybody into this, right? They see the rain barrel, and this is a fabulous way to get started. There's a lot to learn about water catchment and endless possibilities with how and what to use and when to use it, where to use it, what to add, and how to get water from point A to point B. But this is a really easy way to start out and not feel overwhelmed. A single bucket, typically they're kind of cute. You know, kind of cute. You can do something that is completely, you know, utility option. But basically they all have a hose bib on the bottom. Typically they're up a little bit higher than the ground level, but it'll just be slower once it gets down there if it's on the ground level. I am pretty sure, somebody asked me what the heck this was in the last class. I am pretty sure this is their overflow. And there's actually, I don't know, I did not look at this picture close enough before I put it on here from the internet, but they should be able to fill this tank, and then whenever this tank, I don't know what's happening here. You had your,
I actually have that.
you do, so
Yeah,
what is
and
this?
Inside is, I guess if you can imagine a square that's open in the middle and ridged around the outside. The water, according to the brochure,
Yeah.
it says that the water tends to cling to the outside of the
Oh,
the outside.
inside of
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, it clings to that, and as long as your bucket isn't full, it will go in
Cool.
to there, and then once your bucket is full, it'll just overflow and dump down in the middle of that square. There's like it's like
Neat.
if you imagine like a ridged ring,
Yeah.
a ridged square ring around the outside, water goes in there, and then when it gets full enough, that
Of
overflows.
course, that does make sense. So you used it?
I haven't hooked it up yet. We're gonna re-side our house, and I don't want to
Yep.
put anything in anybody's way.
Yeah, cool. I hope somehow I'll hear about that.
We actually use the same kind of buckets. We got those on the same kind of barrels. We found them on Craigslist for $10 a piece.
Isn't that an incredible resource?
And,
Marketplace. And
And I didn't want them, ours were white, and I was worried about algae, so I spray painted them black. And so far, the paint seems to be holding. I was worried about
yeah,
holding on to plastic. You know,
Yeah.
So far, so good. It's been
cool,
about
especially for
months.
heat and summer and
Yeah.
dry and weather extremes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for that information. I sat there and went, Actually, I've got no idea what's
You
happening
can
with
put
this
another very similar hose in the other side if you want, and
for the overflow.
daisy chain it.
Yeah, so there's, I wonder if I can. So happy I can go backwards today, like this.
Yeah.
Over here. We're gonna talk about platforms today too. These are. Hey, barrels. Okay, so a great way to get started while you're assessing what your most amount you can capture, what your bandwidth is, any little bit really does count, really does matter. Here's a family, oh, you can really see this. Rain chain utilizes a rain chain, and then this rain barrel here, can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Then she just pulls a line, a hose line, and waters this, waters these, water these. When the water's gone, it's gone. Everything has to fend for itself. That's how she decides what stays and what goes. Oh man, okay, open tanks and drops. This is my favorite, mostly because I'm a very visual person. I want to see what kind of water is happening in there. I want to know what's going on with the water. I want to be able to feel it and look at it and touch it and smell it. And I'm very multi-purpose, not a big fan of a single. I feel like that you can always find something to do with multiple things to do with something. And so these water tanks allow you to use these for grow spaces also and create these tiny little microclimates and habitats and provide for pollinators and for birds and for wildlife all at the same time. So open tanks and troughs. And I'm sure everyone's like, yeah, but the mosquitoes, we'll get there. Promise.
I also have a question, what about, if you're told wildlife, small wildlife falling into something like
Yeah, we'll get there too. Good point. I'm stoked everybody's asking questions today. Okay, here's one of my lessons that I learned. This was a total rookie mistake. I had been catching water for 15 years at this point, moved into my new house, threw all these stock tanks up against the wall, November, the day we moved in, and then all the rain happened and I was like, what have I done? I have these giant, heavy tanks and everything's just overflowing onto my entire boat, right up against the foundation. So lesson learned, right? You utilize that water, get it out of space, make your adjustments. One of the ways you can help avoid this situation, besides just moving it out a little bit, is creating platforms for these to sit on that are stable, because otherwise you don't really consider, you know, once the ground is saturated all around it, the bricks that are on might move just a little bit more, everything's kind of gonna shift, and it is important to have, if you're gonna have open tanks, without your overflow system set up yet. I mean, this really was, shame on me, because I've been doing this for so long at my other house that it was silly that I didn't think about this. Anyway, here's a platform system that we put in for somebody, and gutters are next. So she'll get gutters, she'll have a downspout that comes here, she'll utilize a trough tank on this first platform. The overflow will go into this second platform here. The overflow for this one goes into a tank that sits on the ground, much like the one I just had, a big round tank. And then this overflow waters a passive fungal bed, capturing and utilizing every resource to its maximum the whole way down. So then now we've got all these open tanks and these excellent spaces for mosquitoes to move in and make millions. Oh, we're not there yet. Sorry, let me backtrack. So because we already talked about this, have a plan for excess. I am both passive and intensive and very intentional with my water catchment. I have spaces that I just allow them to do whatever they're going to do with water catchment. My overflow directs itself because I've set it up that way. I have places like this system where I'm moving this corrugated tube and I'm paying attention every single time. If I'm going out of town and it's the middle of the winter, I'm going to put my overflow tubes out immediately. That's just where the water is being directed. We don't need to capture anything at that moment because that's how my system is set up. Now, you certainly would want to be considering those things if you travel or are gone a lot. Probably you don't have to worry about it, that's only in the summer, because, you know, that's not when the rains are here. So having a plan for access is really important. And sometimes that means moving a tube from place to place, utilizing things that you have, a gutter. I had a piece of a gutter left over, and not enough tubing to get from the point that I really wanted to go. So I just throw that down and let the water drain where I want it to when I'm moving it to that spot. Right here, this, believe it or not, has just enough of a pitch that all of my overflow, if I messed up, or if it happened overnight and I forgot, I fell asleep, all of my overflow happens at this spot right here. So I just channel that then out into the ground cover. Oh, here this is again, that's where that water overflows and then just feeds all of this down below. Questions about this? Am I all over the place? That's pretty well my style, bouncing. Water from this tank right here is collected and it was collected from a drip that was right over here. And then all of that water was used to feed this system until I had it on a drip line in the summer a couple of years later. And then excess from this space just overflowed into this area here. If you're looking at overflow and you've got flat tanks and I'm saying there's just enough of a tilt, it really is so small. You're not looking at that tank and you don't see a big difference. You don't want anything to be gushing out. You're just tilting in a smidge so it has somewhere to go softly and it's not disrupting all the ground below it. Okay, another view of this the water that's collected off the greenhouse goes and keeps that the plants inside of there happy, and then the overflow, this is tilted just enough that it feeds this elderberry, which gets zero water from the sky during any time there's a giant silver maple over the top of it. So it is dry underneath there. Tree gets whatever water is available. So any of the overflow then is fed to the water or to the elderberry. Those are plants inside the greenhouse. Here we are. Now we're back on track, keeping the water clean and pest free. I am a big fan of air stones. Has anyone seen those? Okay, cool. I've got a picture. Air stones. These are awesome. You buy this little pump and plug in all these 4-inch tubes and then put these air stones in. You can have 1 or 2 air stones in a tank, in a trough tank that's about the size that I've been showing you here. And that just keeps the water circulated enough to not have it be stinky and not have any mosquitoes. Everything else is open air. I haven't had any problems by utilizing these air stones. And you can find them with a plug-in, electric plug-in or solar. And I would say if you are finding a solar stone, it might be more worth your while to do a solar panel and plug the pump into the solar panel because they're just not advanced enough for them to be sustainable. You'd be replacing them frequently. So we're still testing the solar options for those, trialing them here and there. So this is an air stone. You can use mesh netting, like mesh screening. That's what a lot of folks use. They just lay it over the top, put a big wire around it, and then tighten the wire around the edge. I don't prefer that method because I really like there to be water movement happening. So things can't get in, but also you still have water sitting. And if you don't have water, oxygen in the water, then we have all sorts of problems with it being slimy and algae and stinky and gross. You're still probably going to have some algae here and there anyway, because the water coming off the roof is not sterile. And then my favorite, besides these air stones, I use in combination with pond plants or water cleaning plants or water loving plants. And because I have an edible landscaping heart, I typically try to push myself towards water loving food crops. So far, I haven't felt concerned enough to worry about what is happening, the water that's coming off of my rooftop into my collection tanks, having some sort of toxicity that's being soaked up by plants. We do the best we can with what you have available. But if you were concerned about that, you should look into biochar bags for purifying water. We won't say that word anymore tonight because I could go for days talking about that too. Air stones. Oh, here's inside of that system. So that's where that downspout comes in. And then that all collects in this tank that's both half in and half out. I have some plants that sometimes get water fed, bottom water fed if the water is up high enough to that level. And then that's just what those air. This is the middle of the winter. No problems keeping it because the air is circulating and this is partial inside, partial outside greenhouse. This tank never freezes. My tanks that are fully exposed outside usually have about 12 to 18 inches of liquid in the bottom and then like a 6-inch cap of ice on top. My air stones are still going down there. Utilizing plants then. So why do we want to do that? For oxygen, to create shade for your space, for the tank that it's holding so that you can keep algae low, for pollinator support. You know, often you have wildlife or bees or insects that come and fly over big tanks and you have, you know, insect massacre because there's nothing for them to sit on. So one thing you can do is provide some sort of floating top, floating cover, even if it's something like lilies in lily pads in the pond or something that are sitting there, something that a insect can land on and get a drink of water without drowning. You can also float logs or sticks on top of there. You can place, if this is our water tank, you can place, you know, 2x4 or sticks or something. Typically you want to sink one portion into the bottom. So if a bird is stuck, there's some way for that bird to walk out once it hits the stick that's penetrated below the water line. Plants will help clean up your water, so your water is technically then safer when it's going back out into the landscape. And this is watercress, so I can harvest this crop and eat it in my salad if I want to. So that feels pretty rad to me. Little wins, you guys, little wins. Here's another example. That tank you saw that had the covered patio area overflows into this little pond here, and they're growing things like lopado, which is a indigenous food tuber crop. There's some, this is a lotus or a lily or something, and then there's some things like rumex and a couple of other plants up there, some ornamental, some things that they can harvest to eat. So this is just another example of a collection tank. And I think they actually, excuse me, this is an overflow tank, and they actually have fish in this pond. These are the same folks with the big swales that use that flood system from their tanks. Here's a grown-up version of that. This is that lopado, cattails. Anybody ever had cattail pollen? Used cattail pollen? No? Oh my gosh. But not the, okay, when it's pollen season for that, go and put a paper bag on it and shake it. And nobody in the World Wide Web do this and, you know, be sick or anything. Disclaimer. But you can use it to substitute out like a fourth of your flour in a recipe, in a baking recipe. 100% ID first, everybody. Doing. Again, I'm super passive, super intensive, all in the same plot of land. So tubing, corrugated tubing, perforated tubing, downspout emitters, PVC, all sorts of things you can use to get water from point A to point B. Sometimes we use tubing to direct water during the rainfall. Maybe it's just corrugated tubing coming directly from the downspout over here. Sometimes it's to direct excess water from the holding tanks. Maybe this has you have tubing systems to control your overflow, and those are being channeled out in far places. Maybe those are even in-ground tubing. That's even in-ground tubing that has an overflow. Ooh, how cool would that be? If you could like, oh man, okay, hang on. Take it easy. We'll get there. Self. And then of course it's used when you're accessing your stored water. Tubing. This area only uses rainfall, and so this tube goes all the way across the driveway from some random downspout in the middle of the pavement land. And I pull it all the way over to this tiny little wedge of earth. And this is 2 years later, just with the appropriate plants put in that space, capturing just the rainfall water. How cool, right? Again, corrugated tubing, coming down straight from the downspout, and that way I can move this any which way I want to. I have a tank that's over here, right here, so I can move this tube when I want to. I needed to get water over to the raspberries over here, during a tiny thunderstorm that we had. You bet it watered my raspberries. Pretty stoked about that. So my corrugated tube wasn't long enough. This is where I just stuck that other piece of gutter to go in. Doesn't have to be fancy. If fancy's your jam, it can absolutely be fancy. Okay, here's where I was going, feeling excited about this in-ground situation. Has anyone ever seen these pop-up drain emitters? Yeah, you're the only one, huh? That's because you're not supposed to see them.
We ran a downspout underneath our patio.
Oh, nice.
All the way to the back of the yard.
To the lawn?
And
Cool.
water.
Can anybody hear, did everybody hear that? So these, maybe not you, these awesome pop-up drain emitters are a way for, this is great if you like clean, not corrugated tubing and rain gutters everywhere and, you know, such. If you need the clean appearance, or if you live in an HOA who is dictating your guidelines about rainwater collection, and I see that often. HOAs may not allow a rain barrel. This is an excellent option for getting your water where you need it to go when the resource is available. So the rainwater comes down from this gutter, fills into this teeny tiny box, and then this tube is run, like he said, underneath some sort of surface. So his is underneath the driveway, which has to be done before the driveway is poured. We've seen those things before. We've seen some really strange things where they just pop up in the middle of a concrete driveway and you're going, you might as well just let it run off. There's a lot of extra work there. But this is a great way to get from point A, where you're collecting the water, all the way out to somewhere like a tree that needs to be dewatered, or a lawn, or a bed that's sunken, like you're saying it happens at your house. And what I was thinking with this overflow, when I got excited and had to hold myself back, is that your overflow, this could be attached to your overflow. So you have your collection tanks. Once that is right up here, and then once that is filled, your overflow would flow into this and then dewater everything out far away. That's cool. Like that idea. Get to work after I observe. Any questions on these?
They actually pop up like a sprinkler, or?
It doesn't like, it just bubbles out. So it's more like flood irrigation. So you want to make sure that's being captured somewhere, whatever your end terminating point is for this. You don't want that to be just running off into the street, which is often what we see from these. They put them right at the very edge to get it so that I'm not sure why they do that. Actually, I couldn't explain it if I tried.
It's really easy to accidentally cover it up too, so put a
Yeah.
decorative rock by it or something, so you don't.
You're very right about
Wood
that.
chips over it, or
And then the wood chips get in the vase and
Yeah.
yeah, you've done this before. Me too. But these are right for the right place for sure. Is anyone in HOA neighborhoods? Yeah, do you guys know what your guidelines are, restrictions about water catchment?
There's nothing that I've found in
Do
our
covenants?
that says anything about like guidelines for rainwater catchment, so.
Maybe you start with a rain barrel just to do a cute one. And you too, do you know what your guidelines are? Cool, I mean, try it and see what happens. And I do want to say too, that HOAs are really coming around. When you start throwing words at them like sustainability and drought, water wise and that sort of thing, year-round interest, there's lots of words you can use to convince your HOA.
I can't imagine that my HOA, we have
shared pond for
Oh, for
irrigation,
fun.
and that feeds everyone's sprinklers, and we always have trouble with people watering too much or too often, and we sometimes run out of water, so.
HOA board, here you come.
Yeah, they shouldn't have a problem with this if it's going to extend the whole neighborhood's.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Well, that issue goes beyond HOAs though. I mean, even farmers' water rights, everything goes downhill, right? Counties get involved.
Right.
Farmers, so on and so forth. So it's illegal in a lot of places to have water catchment systems.
It is not illegal to have water catchment in Idaho. Just to clear that one up right now. Lots of other places, you're correct. You cannot capture water. Rainwater systems are not legal here. Rainwater catchment systems are supported by the city.
And we did double check it, rainwater catchment is even in state code. So you guys are covered across the board, and we also, I've heard rumors that Suez, now Veolia, was unsupportive of rain barrels. But actually we've been in communication with them, and they are very supportive of rain barrels and actually helped us promote this class. So you won't run into any issues. As far as we know, we've tried to do our due diligence just to make sure that there's no concern.
Residential rainwater collection, the end.
Correct. There is still, right, if you are on an irrigation system, I believe then there are limitations about capturing runoff from fields, but I don't think that, that's not the topic of this class. We are just really talking about the rain barrels. Irrigation runoff from farmers' fields is a whole different topic,
But you're right. Absolutely.
water's tricky, especially in Idaho.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about swales, ditches, trenches, directing water from one place to another by changing the way that it moves through the space. So sometimes swales are used to get to water along a long length, water along a long length. I've got great words on Tuesday evening. So to water as you're getting from point A to point B. If you've got something where you've got a small swale that's going through two beds on either side, that would be an appropriate use to use a swale instead of a PVC pipe or a corrugated tubing that's only getting it from here to there without dropping anything around that. During that movement, if you need to get it longer distances and you have enough pressure, if you've got huge tanks, then you can get, by utilizing swales, if you have the right kind of soil, you can use swales to get water from point A to point B that's a longer distance. And then you can use them directly under a downspout. So if you want to water the entire space every single time, and you don't have collection tanks or any way of collecting water, but you can create a small trench along a driveway or something, then you could just have your downspout go directly into a swale or a ditch, fill that up and flood, maybe even into a collection pond or something. Any questions so far? Am I too back and forth and back and forth? I don't know what I do about it that was, actually. I keep coming back to this house,
Whose foot is that?
the homeowner's foot. They're barefoot kind of people. Okay, maybe this is just a better view of these swales. So here's the water, this tube right here, PVC pipe is right at this point, and this gate opens if they want the water to go this way, closes if they want to raise the water to feed along these ditches a little bit higher first. Travels all the way over here and then basically floods kind of a flatter dip over on this section here. They plan things accordingly. So plants that need more water are closer to the swale, plants that need less water are high and dry. Catchment ponds. Not everybody can have these. Certainly if you're in a small space, it doesn't make sense. There's all sorts of rules about ponds and kids and access to the backyard and depths and that sort of thing. So disclaimer there, when you're using a catchment pond, read all the rules and regulations. Catchment ponds are great if you've got clay soil that will hold some water for even a short period of time. You can use liners if you want, not everybody does. Sometimes it's trickier to keep rainwater catchment ponds clean with a liner because nothing's ever being filtered through. And the other thing about that is that as you're utilizing your catchment pond and it's also draining at the same time, you're helping to replenish that aquifer by allowing it to go down into the ground. Where if you have a pond, you'd be overflowing a liner, you'd be overflowing all the time if you didn't have a plan in place for that. So catchment ponds though, these can be really great in particular places. We utilize tubing to direct all that rainwater into the catchment pond during the driest parts of during the parts of the season where we have massive rain flow and need to fill the pond because the ducks haven't been washed in, months and they're full of mud or whatever. And then from this point, once you collect the water, you can either utilize this to grow more plants inside this pond space and up along the edges. You can build habitat, just have habitat space. That's perfectly acceptable for water catchment if you're also replenishing the aquifer at the same time. And sometimes, you just want your ducks to have fun. Before habitat improvement. I'd say that's pretty solid. So this is our catchment pond down here. We've got cattails growing inside of here. Anytime you put plants and root systems in your pond, in your catchment pond system, you're gonna hold more water in there for longer periods of time. So then I can siphon or flood or pump if I want to. Any of this water down here, the ducks keep it clean and pest free. When the ducks are gone, I have more problems and have to reconsider this this system right here. This then goes to fill a tank that's above ground. You got a question? No? Anybody else? Questions somewhere? Okay. So then if this pond overflows, or when it does, then it feeds and the water is just seeping into the ground here, moving from water energy into plant energy. This is the same catchment pond, early spring, right before the trees were starting to break. Or right when they started to break, after several days post rainfall. So we still have plenty. There's about 2 feet in the bottom of this section, just in this middle circle here, that these ducks are still hanging out in. And when I look at this and I go out here and observe, I'm thinking this is several days post, but it's not several enough to really make a difference for when I need to utilize that water again, if I need to pull water out of there. So because I don't want to use a liner, and because it has ducks, so ducks and liners are so gross, filthy. Ducks are so dirty. So I want that water to drain and replenish, but I want it to do a little bit slower than the pace it's going. So I've just started planting all in this level here, which is technically considered like a bog level, which then you can get into natural pond building and you're gone. We'll never see any of you again. It's a cool rabbit hole, super cool. So getting root systems established in there can help keep water and catchment ponds for longer periods of time. Everybody feeling good? It's a lot of information so far. What if you just want to get your feet wet? See what I did there? Anybody? No? Nobody here's honey? Can you start small? Yes, you can. So try not to be intimidated by all these steps and processes we're talking about. If all you have is a window and a tote, try it. Put it anywhere. I still have this system. I kid you not, it travels with me from house to house. I love it. I always have a leak somewhere in some sort of 5 or 6 strip line, and I throw together whatever I have in the moment in the greenhouse. This window fills this entire tote and spills over. And all of this is planted. It's a big swale underneath here, is fed then when this overflows, all gets water in this area. So start with that. I only have this and this and this, try it. And then modify it, change it, adapt it. Start with a drip in a bucket. I don't have any way to collect water off of a flappy corrugated piece of metal that is semi-supporting some things for a minute while I'm between rooftops. Not at my house. I have a roof. So start with that drip bucket. You'd be surprised how quickly that bucket will fill. And then what do you do with this bucket? You've got all these buckets all over the place, catching all these drips, and you're tripping over those. So what do you do with them? You get out your super soaker. It's my favorite tool, really it is. it's excellent when you've got your 5 gallon bucket and maybe you need to tip over the bucket and water a couple of things that are right around it. Water containers that are on a patio, spot water plants by maybe you have young trees or shrubs and they need a good deep water. 3 gallons goes on there, and then you spot water with the remaining 2 gallons. Maybe you give it all 5 gallons. House plants, brings that water inside. You know, we use so much of our water inside here. Everybody loves house plants these days. So why don't you utilize that resource that you have and water your house plants with it? No. Okay. So how do we even calculate what we could potentially get from our rooftop if we're just looking at our single rooftop? I don't math. Here's Jess.
So, it's not that hard. You can have, like, you can take a picture of this, do your calculations at home. They also have really handy online systems too, where you just have to put in the square footage of your rooftop and it'll pop out that number for you. So let's say you've got, you know, your 30-foot by 50-foot like roof. So you've got 1,500 square feet for your house, and we're just going to multiply that area amount by the amount of rain in inches. And our average rainfall here is 13 inches in the Treasure Valley. And then the internet gave me a magic number. So I don't math either.
Sometimes maths.
Right, so just that number will get the quantity of gallons. So by this example, for a 1,500 square foot house, you can capture 12,000 gallons of rainwater, which is a small pool, which is a ton of water. And then if you have a pool, it helps you feel really good about filling up that pool with all your other water. So, just with, you know, I really love looking at these numbers and seeing how much of a difference you can make. And I think 12,000 gallons of water in our high desert climate is really impressive for rainwater catchment. And you don't always have to be catching it. I do a lot of rainwater catchment where I just flow it into my garden instead of having it kind of sit there in the driveway puddling. And it's really nice to actually help replenish the aquifer instead of sending 12,000 gallons of water from every house down the stream. So
the other thing I'd add about what Jess is saying about directing water into beds. Well, why are you directing? I get this question all the time. Why are you filtering water into beds while it's raining? Well, our rainfall on the ground proper is, you know, a 1/16 of an inch. But collectively, if we're pulling that all off and getting all of those gallons, not 12,000 at once, obviously, to that space, then you're supporting deep water. You're starting to have, often our soil becomes hydrophobic, repels water, and we get so dry here, and so it takes slow watering. So that nice top water that's a 1/16 of an inch that's happening kind of conditions the soil to be able to then pull the rest of that water from your directing drain through your downspout into those beds during that same rainstorm, making it so that your rainwater collection is much more effective.
Jess?
Yeah.
Is that Ada County's average rainfall versus precipitation? Because so much of our precip here comes as snow, and I don't want to use that in my calculation for my rainwater capture.
I think it is, I can double check.
Or does anybody know, is there a good source to
Yeah,
find
I-
just rainfall, or maybe you do it by season, I suppose, like.
I think that's total annual.
Yeah, I think that's annual precip, which should include
I'd
snow.
like to all.
Oh, not again.
Wait, we're recording this.
This was the case for not recording. That happened.
that's a good point. So I guess this does vary then from if you are collecting in the winter or not. And I imagine that would be tricky, and you have to have a more complicated system. So
Yeah, so I think there are probably sources where we can look at rainfall by month. So
Yeah,
you can look at the non-freezing months, right? Temperature, so April through whenever.
And there's a conversion for snow, but still it'd be nice to just know precipitation.
Yeah, it'd just be nice to know when we're not gonna be freezing.
I just looked it up and it says Ada County gets 13 inches of rain
Rain.
and 16 inches of snow.
yes.
Okay. 16 inches of snow is like an inch and a half.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're not lying.
Thanks. The other thing, talk about snow in a minute, right?
Yeah, perfect. At the end, yes, if we get there. Everybody hang in there? Everybody gonna make it to the end? If you need to leave, of course, don't make a big scene. We're moving on the night out. And this is also, if you're only calculating a 30 by 50-foot roof, if you've got more or less than that, you wanna, of course, play into that. And also, that's why it's important to collect off of every possible rooftop option you can. We have systems in place where we're collecting rainwater off the chicken coop, and that water is stored and then is feeding, that is the chicken's water. That's just what they're using. That's a spectacular system. It's not drawing any resources and collecting what would otherwise just be in a poopy mucky mess down there. Poopy mucky mess. Talking to my children. I don't say that. Oh, right. Okay, now we've gotten the water from where it's collected to where we want it to go, and how do we keep it there? Because if we're just quickly getting that water there and it's running through and then the wind comes through and everything is dried out, now we have no water again, and how do we keep it in place longer? Maximize your water holding and retaining capacity by building your soil. And what does building your soil mean? It means layering and layering and layering and layering and layering and never stop layering, ever. Layers of organic matter diversify them. That can be leaves or straw or a different kind of leaf the next year, or some sort of wood mulch, or maybe it's wood chip one year and dairy mulch the next year. Living mulches, which means something like a creeping thyme, ground cover. Even vining vegetables are considered a living mulch, something that's going to keep your earth covered. Chopping and dropping, is anyone familiar with that term? Cool, it's not everyone. So if you go through and you're cleaning up your perennials during the season at the end of the year and everything retracts back into the ground and you really aren't into winter interest, you're going to chop it, leave it on the ground. Chop, drop, the end. Start building organic matter in those spaces. Go ahead.
Why does it important to have
For nutrition profile and different particulate size, it breaks down faster. No scientists quote me on that.
That was a good quick answer though.
Thank you. Oh, I've been playing, experimenting a lot with building some of these tanks for my swales in particular. Is anyone familiar with hugelkultur? Yes. Hugelkultur is a super cool permaculture technique where you're basically taking all of your debris from your space. Maybe you have a tree that needed to come out or something, and you're laying down big logs and then little logs and then leaves. It's like glorified lasagna gardening, and you're making a big mound. Well, I was thinking about that concept because these hugelkultur mounds hold water, slowly break down nutrition, and help feed everything that's planted above it. It's just this closed loop, super awesome system. So I thought, okay, if I want to deconstruct that, how can I make those things work in a space that I can watch them for a while? So I've lined some of my swales, my flood swales, with logs or sticks or parts of logs that are then wedged into the ground. Some of them in particular are wedged up against sand because I have swale. So I have, can you guys see okay? Land, swale, berm, and about this point on is all sand. These are high and dry xeric plants up here. This is sage. High and dry. Desert plant. That's somebody who fancied their sage. Okay, so sand here. This is my swale. I started putting logs, so they're in the mud, in the clay. My water level comes up. My water level comes up to about here. this gets saturated, and then this whole log gets saturated with water, and then the sand pulls water from this log and just teeny tiny feeds these high and dry xeric plants that I need them to water, because I'm not pulling a hose out to the back 40 to do this. So I've got my swale, I've got logs all stacked in here, some pieces of like bark edges and whatnot, some sticks. So I'm just in the process of trialing this right now, and so far it's proving to be a functional system, which just makes me so excited. Anyway, that's what I'm doing with logs.
What is that term you said?
Google culture, Hugelkultur.
We did
Yes.
something like that. We just moved and my wife took a bunch of the plants and we just stuck them in this one corner of the yard because we're tearing up the whole yard, we're remodeling and stuff. And we cut down a bunch of 60, or we trimmed down a bunch of 60-year-old lilac bushes.
Oh,
And
nice.
so anyway, we had this giant pile of very woody waste, and then they dug out the foundation for the addition, and I said, pile it on there. And we planted a couple things on there, and what we're right now, because nothing's broken down, it's requiring a lot of water,
Right.
because it drains away so fast.
And you had soil and then logs, or you had your soil put on top of your brush pile?
Soil put on top of.
Brush pile, okay.
Yeah. And so, and there probably isn't enough there, but I'm thinking by next spring it'll probably be okay, because it's already breaking down.
And give yourself a really good layer, like 8 to 12 inches of leaf matter this winter. And then you could top it off with something else to capture all that, like wood chips or something. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I have kind of a modified system that I've been using in my raised garden beds.
Yeah.
And I just dig up the dirt in the spring, and when I have like grass clippings and whatever around kitchen waste, and basically dig large holes.
Like trench composting.
Yeah,
Cool.
I guess that's probably the term for it. Just dig deep in my beds and then cover it over with dirt, and I have the hugest worms in there.
Cool.
Massive.
Feeding, no waste, closed loop.
Yeah.
Can't be mad at that. Okay. So we all know the way to maximize our water holding and retention capacity in our soils, to build and build and build and build and build our soil. Here's just an example of underneath this bed, there was another mulch from the year before. All the leaves were done for this season, so all of those went into the bed, and then I put another layer of compost on top of it. This compost this is a Black Forest compost, which is the composted floor of the wood mill. So it's like Cascade compost, that real woody mill compost. Beautiful dark and a lighter nutrition profile because it's multiple kinds of trees usually. Anyway, so that gets layered and layered and layered, and then I'll do the same thing each year. Intensive, and sometimes I'm not. Straw, cedar, just showing different kinds of mulches. Here's that log system. Oh, good. Stoked I have this photo in here. Here's this. This is the swale when it's full of water. The logs and pieces of woody debris are in here, and then this is that sand layer that's already pulling that water up. I also have a straw layer. In some areas, straw holds water so nicely. It gets really matted down there. So I have on one side, if I have a circle, I have like an island berm, and the swale goes all the way around it nearly. So on one side, I am trying just the logs, and on the other side, I am trialing those logs with a layer of straw that goes right before the sand layer. So far, they're both successful. Consider a different kind of drip system, little bits that add up. So maybe you have a drip, but you don't really have the space to put in a system, or you can't really collect anything off of it. Maybe it's just not, it's bothering you. Put a plant there. Look for plants that need water just during those seasonal rains. A lot of our native plants are that way. Or put a container on rollers and roll that under that drip. And then put the next one under there, and then the next one under there. Intensive and passive. Intensive and passive. Passive, intensive. This water feature is the one that is here now that used to be next to, or that used to be the water trough that was on the side of the patio that I was overflowing into the garden. This is now just a functioning system that only works during the rainy parts of the month. Otherwise, the whole thing drains and dries up for the year. But I collect, this tank is probably, or this container is probably this tall and this wide, and it stays full during most of the spring and summer, spring and fall. Into quite a bit of the summer until everything evaporates. So then I can grow my watercress in here early season and then be done once the weather's too hot anyway. Taking a look at systems that you already have in place. Maybe you have downspouts and not a lot of bandwidth, and you've got a couple of buckets sitting out. You're just kind of checking to see what's going on around, and you're observing and interacting. Well, one thing you can do, either permanently or just between phases, is consider the opportunities that are already there. Right now, this downspout and this downspout are just going off into a big mulch field. Well, what if instead you connected a perforated tube? Does everyone know what I mean by perforated tubes? You've seen those that have holes down the whole way, so they allow water to percolate throughout the entire. So maybe you connect a perforated tube in this space right here. Maybe it has a Y on it so that overflow can happen. I'm not sure how exactly you put this whole thing together. And then this waters this bed that's protected by the eave up here. It doesn't get any water otherwise. And this is early season wildflowers. So often those aren't things that need water long term. They just need help getting germinated. Any questions before I jump into this? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about designing with rainwater catchment in mind when you're designing your landscape. So we're going to go back, of course, to observing and interacting. When you are designing with water catchment in mind, you want to first ask, why are you capturing water? What is the goal on yours, other than you don't want it to go downstream? So remove that part. Why do you decide you want to capture water in your space and use that to water your landscape? Is it that you want to supplement some of your watering in the summer? Is it that you want to only rely on rainwater for your entire landscape? Do you just need to water your indoor house plants because you feel funny about that? Whatever your thing is, put a goal in front of you. And it doesn't mean that goal can't change. It's just your starting point, because you're probably going to be so stoked after your first water catchment bucket, and you're shocked at how much overflow has happened from your 5-gallon bucket after one rain in the desert. You're going, I should have had 6 barrels out here already. So think about what you want that goal to be first, and then maybe long term. Consider using plants that only need seasonal water. Bulbs are awesome for that. They typically only need the water from the winter to be soaked up into their big bulbous root systems, and then they bloom with no water and don't want anything else throughout the summer. Think that way. Put plants in that want the water when we have the water option most of the time. Often that means many of our native and regionally adapted plants. So you can have lush and full and beautiful and water 3 times a year. And maybe that also includes the sky. And maybe that means you're flooding some of these spaces. Examples of plants. This whole space gets watered. This year, I think we're on 5 times this year. And that's an increase from the last 2 years, which were 3 and 4. So I've had to increase 1 every year. Is that right? Yeah, over the last couple of years, because we're in such a deficit. And this also this is zone 647 out here. It's like radiant heat from the house and a sidewalk in the circle and every other house around. So it is extreme up in this space. But I add wood chips or some sort of mulch to this space every single year, just so I can keep getting organic matter on there.
Plants there that are like little fires.
These guys, Schuberti alliums. Oh, they're like this big. They're so cool. SCHUBERTI, maybe double I. Any other questions? But, you know, we go through in those first several months, everything looks really lush and beautiful, but now we've had 3 months of 100 degrees and we're cranky and so is everything else. So that means we need to utilize our watering system now at this point. When you're utilizing water systems like this after extreme drought and the soil is not conditioned, you've got to be really patient. Usually it's become hydrophobic. There's big cracks in the ground if you had bare soil. So you can utilize your gravity fed tanks or wherever you're storing from your collection tanks, and then you can take a hose or PVC and lay those out wherever you want that to go. When you're watering in spaces like this, often you're getting out there with a tiny rake or a shovel and you're making tiny trenches in this mulch. Because if your entire space has been flat and walked on for the last 3 months during drought when there's no water, no water is going to seep through. You really need to make some places for the water to go. So you just get out there and you pull your hoe or your rake or your shovel along that space and direct the water where you want it to go. A couple days later, come through and cover it up or don't. Either way, depends on if you like the look of swales all over your yard or not. And this space you saw is a micro space. This is a small yard, so and plants are tight together, so you can't necessarily see that there's a water trench that goes through here. So you're getting out there and guiding and directing water as it's coming out. One thing I'd recommend when you're utilizing your water from your resource tank, when you've got a hose, is that have some way of turning that off so that you're not going from plant and then you've got to run across the driveway and meanwhile all that water is gone. When you're thinking about how you're going to be designing your space, you want to collect plants together that have like needs. So high and dry goes together, or dry plants go together in higher areas, where lower areas that would stay wetter longer or collect water easier would go, more water thirsty plants would go in lower spaces. You'll have more water thirsty plants closer to your resource, where dry desert plants can be out farther because you probably aren't going to water out there as often. Questions there? When you're looking at your plant selection, do you even need the water thirsty plants? And sometimes that answer really is yes, because you have consistent boggy areas. We really do have a lot of boggy problems here that stay wet all summer long, and they could have no irrigation system. It's just that they're in a very compacted development that's probably new, and all the soil was stripped and now they're on hard pan or clay or something that's not allowing that water to dry out. So maybe you do need to capture utilizing a plant that needs more water. Seasonal tips. We'll talk about winter. Spring. You all can guess we're going to observe and interact. Early spring, we are setting up and expanding new systems. We paid attention to what just happened in the winter, how much rainfall or snow we just got. We are checking our existing systems if there were cracks or leaks because we didn't drain our tanks enough, or maybe we didn't drain our tanks at all, or maybe we accidentally forgot that the tank was still, whatever happened, there's some repairs to be done. Prepare for excess water. Typically spring is when we're filling most of our buckets up, at least for the duration of the summer. Because we get most of our water during the winter, that's not really when we have to utilize most of it, other than under trees. Or protected areas. We see a lot of folks that will plant bulbs under eaves. They still need to be watered and collect that water from the sky, and that's not happening if it's protected. So some of your fall or winter water will go into watering those bulbs or trees. Apply mulch. Winter has happened, things have blown away, some things have compacted. If you need to add mulch, having a good 3 to 4 inches on at all times is the sweet spot. 8 or 12 inches of leaf mulch in the fall really is only about 2 or 3 inches come spring. Start using what you've collected already from early spring rains or late winter rains that are not snow or snow melt if it's been warm enough to turn your put your systems back up and get your systems back up and running. This is the best time to store water for our summer drought. And then paying attention to what areas in the spring are still wet from winter water on its own from the sky. If you have areas that are still wet, maybe that's not somewhere that you need to collect water or keep water or direct water. You can just keep going out to those areas that are still bone dry. There will be plenty of them. So this is the time of year that you'll start preparing water to where it needs to go long-term into those dry beds for summer. Anticipating what's going to be based on your note taking from your journals. Any questions on spring? Okay, summer, again, observing and interacting, but we are pretty well in survival mode. The water we have is the water that we have. We're not getting a whole lot of resources, so utilizing that as wisely as you can. Paying attention to what's happening with the actual plant. If you just feel like you haven't watered in a while, I should probably water and everything looks fine, you probably don't need to water. But if you haven't watered in a while and the plants look really sad, that's when you utilize the water, not assuming ahead of time or moving that ahead of time if it's really not necessary, especially if you prepared by planting native or drought tolerant plants. You're going to be assessing your plants and your soil. These areas look really dry and they've got cracks. That means I need more mulch. That means I need to be able to hold water here for longer periods of times. How am I going to add organic matter? Get ready to fill those tanks because fall's coming. And even if it's really late, we want to be prepared to collect water. This can be a really awesome, no stopping point kind of a obsession. You know, you'll get excited and you'll fill your bucket, and then by spring, all of your buckets are full and you're trying to plan how you're going to fit 12 more buckets in this row. Now you feel like you have to go up. I mean, it's just endless possibilities for collection. It's amazing. We will stop raining at some point. So that, I mean, it's not endless. So then if you've taken notes, then you can gauge how much of this tank filled after how many rainfalls and how much have I utilized already this year. So do I need to bank on capturing more for next year? Do I want to? Do I have the bandwidth? Slow deep watering in the summer. This means your trees. Water who is showing what needs support. If the plant isn't saying, hey, I'm droopy and really sad and borderline here, then let it keep going. It's seeking those deep root, that water deep, and you're supporting through root systems. Start making notes in the summer about any plants that needed to be swapped. I thought this should go here, but it really isn't getting hit by my swale, so I need to probably move it to somewhere that is, or replace it with something else, or give it to my neighbor, or plant share, or whatever. Oh, right now we're heading into this. So this is another. You're observing and interacting all the time. So who thrived this year? You're taking lots of notes. Who struggled? Now's the time to be transplanting and swapping those things so root systems can get developed in the winter. Did water get to where it needed to go? Did you find a way to collect more because you probably needed more? Watch the weather and be prepared to collect again. This is the time of year where you might dig a little hole, and sometimes you're putting systems in place in the fall because that's when the rain is happening and you've got rain and then a week and then rain and you want to make some progress. So start experimenting during the fall too. Doesn't mean that whole system has to be in place right away, but just being able to visually see what might happen with whatever topography is happening in your yard is really helpful this time of year. We mentioned before, you need to condition your soil after a dry season. So if you're utilizing the water you have left over, it needs to be really low and slow pressure. Water your evergreens to get them ready for winter. So if you need to drain your tank because you know there's a big storm coming and it's been 4 days of rain, daydream for a minute. It's awesome. I feel better. Then empty those tanks by utilizing them under your tree canopies. And then applying mulch. Once again, if all mulch blew away because you had a really windy summer, or your dogs, you have 6 dogs and the mulch has become the lawn and it's all over the place, 3 to 4 inches, 3 to 4 inches, 3 to 4 inches all the time. So sometimes that means you're applying mulch once again, or you're allowing those leaves to drop in and leafing them on the ground. Again, we're checking our systems and making repairs and expanding, because you probably will expand. Winter, can you collect in the winter? And really my answer is kind of yes so far. That's what I've come up with. Everybody has, that I've seen systems in place is able to collect in some way in the winter. Usually, in my experience, my open tanks that are outside get a good layer of ice on top of those. I'm not typically pulling. Honestly, there's not a lot of water being collected most of that time period because it's so cold, it's just kind of hanging out there. I'm not doing a lot of watering when it's freezing, you know, and it's not going anywhere on the ground anyway because it's been a hard freeze through the ground. So when you ask about fall valves and turning those on during the winter, I'm just not, the most that I do with my trough tanks is bucket system, push that ice cap down and fill my bucket. And then I just spot water a couple of things. Most of the time it's evergreens if we've had no water in the winter. Because we actually have very dry winters and most of our precipitation comes that very tail end. And that's why some of our trees are so damaged after these last couple of really dry winters, because nothing's getting any the water that it needs like it's used to. Typically, we reduce our water tanks, like both the closed tanks. It's not easy to keep water in a closed tank. You need to leave room for expansion. So if you've got a closed tank or a cistern or something like that, a rain barrel, you want to drain it quite a bit. Sometimes that's like half, sometimes that's 3/4. The metal is a little bit easier. It kind of allows a little expansion without breaking any of the seams. At least I haven't had that trouble so far, but also because I am assuming my tank size, I still have a good amount of water on the bottom, and I can then turn my hose bib that's attached at the bottom of that trough. Did you guys see those? Usually if you've got a tank, you've got a hose bib on the bottom, that is all still flowing out fine. Just hook up a short hose and it's not a problem. In my experience, I'm not turning PVC valves or anything, mine are metal. Oh, shoveling your driveway snow, utilizing your snow that is on pavement, assuming you don't have any kind of salts that or de-icers, but utilizing, I am that person, absolutely, in the middle of the snowstorm, shoveling my driveway into a wheelbarrow and wheelbarrowing it to underneath my evergreens and spreading it out. Everybody loves to watch that.
Or even at least just onto the lawn, because that sounds like
Yeah.
a lot of work.
Yeah,
But
you can
if
just
you're-
put it onto something other than the,
And your fruit trees along there,
huh? Great idea.
right? And then your snowboard can dump it right.
And there are things that do not want piles of snow on them. You know, really woody plants, perennials or shrubs do not want snow piled halfway up their branching. But if you've got things that are retreating into the ground over the winter, or you've got lawn next to your driveway like a lot of folks do, shovel that over there, not onto the street, which is not even allowed. You heard that here. This is really important, you know. Snow happening in the winter is one of the best ways for us to watch where snow melt happens, because often you can't see the water once it's below the mulch line or the grass or whatever you've got going on there. So paying attention to where the snow melts first and last, and of course that will change because of sun throughout the summer. Snow melt's not happening in the summer. Do you know what I mean? Your shady spaces and sunny spaces are going to change once summer sun hits, but paying attention to where you might be able to capture water longer, where you might be able to store your water tanks to keep them in warmer spaces. Typically, you try and find a spot that has more radiant heat. That's why we often do up against the house. Also, that's just kind of out of sight, out of mind as far as visual disturbance goes. But then you're collecting radiant heat, and that's helping keep those tanks.
Especially snowfall.
Yep, absolutely.
Dark colored tanks.
Yeah, for sure, which then would help insulate your house. See, everything like that makes me so excited. And do you then find at the end of the winter when your snow is melting, do you have opportunities to collect there? Is it pooling right here always? What do you do about that? I have some folks who, this is kind of an interesting concept that we're still kind of working through, but they live in a townhome and they have this probably double size and a downspout, and everything else is concrete around it. And so they have dug this giant hole and filled it up with some gravel. And then we're gonna plant some things in there to capture what it needs that will tolerate more water down low and the higher stuff, and see if it works. It's like rain gardening in a desert or something. That's what we call it. But it's, you know, utilizing it and taking and looking and trying to be innovative about your solutions when you've got some sort of a challenge, like a box surrounded by all concrete and just the downspout going there. That's a great opportunity to then capture and replenish and go, see, I think we can. Because we can. And then lastly, remembering that rainwater is never a guarantee, so collect what you can, whenever you can, and use it wisely. That's it, you guys. We made it. That was faster than the last one. Cool. Questions, things to share? What's up?
Yeah, early in the session, you mentioned pumps and you're not a big fan of them, but I have a big space and I need to move water a long
Yeah.
ways. And even if I elevate my tanks, I don't have enough pressure to move it. So can you
Super
talk a
fair.
little bit about pumps and if you have to live with them, what to look for and what to look out for?
Clean them all the time. Really, it's just the filter is the problem
Okay.
most of the time. So, and especially if it's coming off of the rooftop, you're gonna have a filter to change frequently with leaves coming down in there and whatnot. So that's the only thing I'd say, probably weekly. If you're using your water tank weekly, I would check your filter as part of your regular watering system. And probably, you'd want to get like middle grade to higher grade pump. Otherwise, you're just going through pumps constantly. They're not really set up to filter like they say they are, which is the frustration. Because then if the filter gets too gross and everything passes through, then you've gunked up the whole system. So they're just high maintenance is all. And if high maintenance is your option, you just kind of have to learn.
Well, it's
what
either
routine.
that or all the labor of moving that water manually.
That doesn't sound
Does
like.
anybody
water
make a decent solar pump for this kind of use?
Not that I have found yet. They're all really small. I have a couple of clients who have purchased a few things and I will say no words on them until probably 2 years of utilizing it. Because if you're having to replace a pump every single year, that's not a sustainable system. Got to figure something else out. And maybe that means pop-up PVC pop-up emitters at your space and to get things from, long distances. Right now, do you flood irrigate too? Or at your home?
No, right now I have 6 of those 50-gallon barrels and you'd be amazed how fast they fill.
Right.
10-inch rainstorm.
It's just.
It's remarkable. But right now I'm using that water to fill a 5-gallon bucket or a water can or something, so I'm hand watering.
Yeah,
And I don't have time to do that.
right. No, I'm a bucketer
I've
also.
got blackberries and raspberries and things that like water, so those plus a lot of native forests and things.
So maybe
I've got to move
water
from
distance.
here to that other wall.
Yeah, so if you've got to use a pump, research the best pump, make sure it's got a stellar filter system that's also really easy to access when you're cleaning it. That's usually the biggest problem is the filter. Wouldn't you say that was the
Does
problem?
anybody else have experience with pump?
I have a pump, but I have not actually ever,
Oh, because you're on city now.
yeah, I just. However.
That's right.
And I got a pump to use it and then I just used it. So it's sitting in my garage.
And pumps are certainly worse with canal water than they are rooftop water. Canal water, you're asking it to filter fruit salad.
We've been pumping from our irrigation systems. We have flood irrigation, so we have pumped out of our ditch and no issues yet, but it's also the first year with this pump. And I'm afraid that it might be a 1-season pump, especially since my husband thought it was fine to put it on the muddy floor. When he turned it on for the first time. So we'll see.
Some pumps are meant to pass particulates.
Right.
It has a big filter, so I'm wondering, I'm really hoping it's one of
Or
those.
even no filter, if the impeller can take it. It just goes through.
Yeah,
And
so
I
I'm
guess it depends on what
screening,
your end
I'm
result-
screening the water before it goes into my tanks.
Okay,
So there's a little bit of screening going on anyway. So if I can find something that would just pass, I don't have to worry about leaves and other debris.
And then at the end, are you terminating with sprinklers?
I'll send you my.
Sorry.
At the end, are you terminating with sprinklers or drip lines, or what do you want to happen when it gets to where it needs to go?
Still designing that. I gotta figure
Okay.
out how to get it there, but I prefer drip lines or something.
Drip lines certainly would need a pump, even if you did non-check valve. You need pressure to come out of there besides what's being gravity fed, and it wouldn't be long enough. If you were gonna gravity feed into drip line, I don't think it would be enough pressure for long enough for it to actually move anything.
Right.
I think you'd be barely dripping water.
One of my neighbors, she did the same thing, which is where we found this pump. And she got a hose attachment, so she could attach a hose to PVC and drilled holes in the PVC pipe.
Yeah.
That runs it along. She did it in her lawn because she has a sloped lawn, but I think if you're watering berries, that would be really cool to move a lot of water quickly.
Yeah. And then the nice thing about that too is those berries really don't want water at the very end, so they can concentrate all those sugars in the berry too. So
Right.
by the time the season was over and your water tanks were empty, okay.
Yeah, exactly. One more question if I could. Do you have a couple of favorite sources for good materials, you know, all the supplies that we need for building our little systems?
We knew this question was coming.
Because when I was putting these barrels together, in case anybody hasn't seen it, I think it's the Okanagan watershed up in British Columbia has a fabulous video about building water capture tanks. And so that's what I used, but it was labor intensive and I had to do lots of running around to various hardware stores to find all
The
the
fittings.
bulkheads and everything and it.
I would say if you're gonna be, you want to go to an irrigation store first, they're gonna have all of the parts. I use Evergreen sprinklers on Chinden. They're wonderful, super knowledgeable and open to the public too. So they probably have everything you need or could order those sorts of things. So if you need specialty water related items, go to a sprinkler store. If you're looking for totes and that sort of thing, I haven't found a great resource for the totes like you have. I go to D&B for all the stock tanks or farm store, farm store? Tractor supply, like something farming and tractoring. Those are, yeah, I don't have a lot of really great solid, we had some leads and then they kind of disappeared. A lot of our nurseries hopefully will be getting on board with at least rain barrels pretty soon. So we'll see if that happens. All we can do is encourage, if somebody calls and says, you guys have rain barrels, and then somebody else does, maybe we'll get some rain barrels in here. And did you have a question?
No, just a comment. I guess it was a sump pump. I had a water feature that I wanted to drain because it had a liner. And oh, by the way,
Yeah.
liners are nasty. There was
18
between the
inches of
leaves
gum.
and stuff. Yeah, there was this nasty stuff on the bottom. And, but anyway, I would just throw it in there and hook a hose onto it and run the hose over to where I wanted.
Gosh,
to
not a
water.
bad idea to put some.
And I never had it. It never caught me ever.
Right, because the sump pump is meant for the house.
Yeah, and it would run,
Cool.
I want to say, well, it was about the same as my hose bib.
Yeah.
As far as the amount of flow. Now, how much pressure that was under, I couldn't tell you, because that's all.
But it was in the ground, so you were pulling from the ground source, not anything that was being gravity fed.
Right.
Cool, I like that idea.
Yeah, and it wasn't terribly expensive either. I don't remember, it's not enough to leave an emotional mark on me anyway. I can't remember how much.
Those are the best purchases. The ones that don't.
It was a good, well, and in fact, that's what I thought I would do is if I decide to drain, I'm gonna get about a 1,200 gallon tank.
Cool,
Plus I got some 50 gallon ones still on the ground.
great.
And I'm thinking when and if I decide I want to drain the bottom of that, that's what I'll do is just throw that sump in the bottom
Yeah,
and run it off the top. But I was wondering, do you have any experience with oils?
yeah,
Yeah, I expected that.
that's
comment.
where it lands.
They're hard.
They're just not super reliable. Has anyone seen the container that you fill? You.
Right out of terracotta oils.
Yeah, here's your plants.
Need a new pen.
I know, it's terrible. This one's a red flower. And then there's this container that you put in the ground. And then you fill the water in here and down here, these are roots. Ooh, water. It doesn't go through this system, this is just pulling water out from here. And then you just keep refilling this. You know where these work nicely is if you've got landlocked beds, like up against the house that are built into the house and those kind of weird strip areas that are surrounded by house and concrete. They work fairly well there. And I'd say they work better. They make more sense in areas that that are not round.
I was thinking raised beds.
Yeah, or even if it just stops all together, like it's a container, like that. This is kind of like the upside down wine bottle situation, except for this one's in the ground. So they're good if that's your option, and they're worth trying in places you can't get anything else, for sure. But there's a lot of other options that you wouldn't have to buy a whole bunch of specific, buying pots for your pots, just to
So-
water your pots.
Yeah, my thought is I'd really like to go grab my raised beds are clear on the other end of the
Mhm.
property. But it's downhill
Oh,
from where the tank will be. And so I'd like to water my raised beds, my fruit trees. Probably just those things off of caught water.
cool.
So
So you gotta get down there. And how much space is that? How much distance? From.
it's gonna be a good 150 feet.
Oh, you got
And
it.
then it'll be tall. I mean, it'll be this much higher.
Okay. Yeah. Wonder if you could flood it into a catchment tank below also. Maybe that's your overflow. Maybe your overflow's at the bottom. You've got catchment tanks at the top of your house, that overflow just goes straight, or maybe why are your catchment tanks up top?
Because I wanted to be able to use gravity.
Oh, right. Okay, there.
And I figured the higher up the better off
Yeah,
it was. And that's right next to the south end of the house.
right.
So
I wonder if you
hopefully not
could-
trees.
I bet they won't. You're using the plastic ones.
Yeah.
I would just
and
make sure
we-
you drain it enough to allow for expansion. Or maybe take the caps off the top.
Yeah, I think I'll go with an open, it'll be
Oh, good.
at least open to air. not
Yeah, good,
just-
good.
And so, yeah, it won't be sealed up tight.
That's when we see the most problems, is those closed rain barrels that don't have any way for anything to escape, and then they just kind of blow fish up, and you've got an ice cube in a bucket that has a broken bucket holding it together. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was just wondering, because you guys mentioned that like residential a couple times, so I was wondering if you have experience with non-residential
There's just,
or what
I ran into
who
quite
to
a
call basically, because that's,
maybe start with the city. Huh?
it's not in city, start with county.
Yeah, and see what your rules and regulations are, because there's some stuff out there that I just recently saw that prohibits commercial rainwater catchment. I have no idea why. I stay way out of commercial opportunities.
Are you talking commercial or agriculture?
Probably depends. on-
Fuzzy lines, we're not gonna give you much
Whose
more detail.
opinion you're asking, it's agriculture, but has a winery on the side, so a
Oh,
lot of people consider that.
I think it would be worth looking into the regulations there, because absolutely you could. Are you trying to water the vineyard, or?
We have a lot of native landscaping, and so we'd like to be watering that with, I mean, right now it's well water, but.
Okay.
Are you in Ada County? I know the commissioners are very pro water conservation. They're very concerned with the drought. And they're working on, the new code as well. So I imagine that, and their state law says that water catchment is okay, and I can't imagine that then they would go against state law and water catchment. I don't know what you've seen about it.
I,
Commercial.
it was recent, and it was prohibiting just water catchment on, which is why I even brought it up during the last, when we were going over what to put on here. I want to make sure I said residential because I saw all sorts of questionable red flags about that, and I'm just not even interested in going there. I'll fight that one day,
Right.
but we'll start right here.
I'm just assuming that if you have a winery and you're using a rain barrel to sort water, and I think it would only really get hairy in a commercial property. This is completely assumption, but just using some logic. If you are Bitter Creek in downtown Boise and you decide that you want to put some kind of rainwater catchment system on the top, like they're gonna have regulations about how that's all being managed. That's the scenario. It wasn't for Bitter Creek, but that was the scenario this article was in. It was in a downtown space. There's buildings everywhere. There's not a lot of landscaping happening. And they were prohibiting, I cannot remember the details of what area, but it wasn't. Agriculture was not part of that conversation to begin with. I think it's worth looking into for sure. Sorry, I don't have that answer. Yeah, I imagine that right on the side of your winery, you have a rain barrel and you're just watering your land. Then you might, right, with agriculture, there's different limitations about watering from different sources. So, I think garden landscape, I can't imagine anybody would say anything about that to me.
How close are your neighbors?
10-acre parcel.
Okay, so you've got some distance there for people on the saddle.
Yeah, no, we're under constant surveillance, so I think if we're gonna do anything, someone. Yeah, that's true.
It's just a problem.
Have you talked to the Department of Water Resources?
Not about this yet, no. Bypass it, that sounds good to me.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, they may not know.
Install it now, and when they, if is the big question, right? If this way,
Yeah.
then you can
Modify
it. No.
Well, like you said, don't ask the HOA, it's better to ask for.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Any other questions?
Recently it was suggested that because most of the insects make their home in the ground, the digging holes, not to put woodball panels on the ground. What is your thought on that?
I disagree. I think always adding organic matter, those creatures find their way. I have plenty of insects in my very, very deep mulch spaces. I'm just creating more habitat, really. I haven't put
Some bare spots too.
Yeah, it's native bees need bare ground.
there's lots of it too.
Well, not in my yard.
Yeah, all I mean is there are, if you have large spaces and you want to leave a bare soil, dry soil space for ground dwelling bees and whatnot, you can absolutely do that. That's a designated area that you can hopefully invite them in. But there's also lots of bare ground around, and we certainly have decline in pollinators and need to be able to support them. But I'm not saying don't cover your ground. I'm saying definitely cover your ground. Definitely build soil.
In suburbia, there is no bare
Okay, so you could absolutely, leave a bare spot if you want to, and not.
Wonder what the future is. I'm thinking around the city, there's lots there.
all around the city, but
but,
with it, you've got this desert. In the
It's still
city
better than
itself.
Yeah, and you get some.
That's my opinion,
Makes me-
obviously.
Building tilt is always a goal that we should be working towards because we're always depleting our resources, always depleting a system at more rapid pace than we are able to rebuild. So any chance you have an opportunity to build and grow earth, you should, in my opinion.
Right, and then someone else suggested, can we place instead of wood mulch to use compost?
Oh, I don't think that's not a bad idea. When I'm talking mulch, I'm talking all sorts of mulch options. Mulch just means ground cover. So it can be not bare soil that's gonna blow away and be, nothing. We want things that are gonna hold moisture in, protect the ground, protect root systems, protect insects. So that can be leaves, that can be compost if you, a heavier compost, not just essentially soil compost at that point. Diversifying those, because some mulches aren't gonna work everywhere. Some mulches aren't right for the right space, or maybe you don't wanna keep putting cedar on because it's not, you can't penetrate it well enough, or maybe you only like to put on arborist chips, wood chips. Maybe you put on wood chips and then next year you put on Black Forest mulch, and then the following year after that, you're using another layer of just compost. You're just building and building and building, slow breakdown, feed, keep the water in, cycle.
How do you prevent when you use leaf? As a mulch, from it from down and preventing actually the moisture get through.
A sheet?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sheets are the best way to get them up in the spring. We tell folks who have HOA neighborhoods that also allow them to leave their leaves in the fall, but get them picked up in the spring, just to wait till you get that nice sheet on and then roll that up and everything's taken care of. So far, if you're not actually, have you tried lifting the sheet and what's happening over there?
Actually, I've left the leaves underneath my raspberry bushes.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of intermingled with twigs and stuff like that. So I'm not sure that it has developed as sheet.
I bet it looks pretty good. I think there's a lot of information out there that we don't have enough written down research, and a lot of this is our knowledge is transferred from each other by connecting, by watching, by experiencing. Anytime you're utilizing resources or you are stewarding the land, this doesn't come in a textbook. This comes from sticking your hands in the ground, watching, feeling, observing, interacting. That tells us all the things we need to know. So if you've got heavy layers of sheeting of leaves, first, I bet you've got moisture under there. I bet it's pretty darn deep. And also, then we're not really trying to take those leaves up. We want those leaves full of all their nutrition and moisture to break down and feed the soil, creating more organic matter. So you're just continuing to build. You're layering on every time. I am not of the belief that you should remove all the leaves from your lawn. Your lawn bounces back. Every year, it'll look really yellow when you pull the leaves off and move them aside to your raised beds, or when you mulch them into your grass, but then your grass is green again. Yeah.
I really hate to wait.
Yeah.
So I just put my lawn over it and bag it. And then I had a bunch of compost bins, and I had like 4 of them in a row and then turned them all over. And then some places I would just use it like mat mulch. And with them all chopped up from the lawnmower, it really break down fast. Just easier to handle.
I would encourage most people that if you've heard something and you're not sure if it makes sense, you should try it and then see for yourself. And if it works in your space, spectacular. And if it doesn't work in the other person's space, they'll find the next thing. As long as you're paying attention and continuing to adapt to whatever is happening in your landscape that's going to change every season, every year, you're never doing the same thing exactly the same way every single time. And if you are, maybe you're not paying as much attention as you should. At that point, you probably have overwatered or underwatered in some location. You maybe have lost some things. Maybe you've got bare ground in areas you don't want bare ground. Maybe you've got too big of a pile somewhere else. Pay attention, interact, get in there, or let the water run down the drain.
I have had that similar question in regard to pollinators, and a lot of the important mulch though actually does, it insulates that ground too. They do find their way out.
It's one of the reasons they tell you not to rake up your leaves is because there's so much habitat and life cycle happening within that layer during those seasons.
So it's just as long as there's, some cover, it does help to prevent that really deep frost then from sinking too low and killing the life in the ground too. So it is all a balance, you know, not over mulching, leaving bare ground, but also still considering the soil. So I think there's just kind of an art to figuring out the space.
And that fall mulch is really to keep the ground frozen so that you're not having thaw, you're not breaking dormancy back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's what that fall coverage is for. Keep that ground cold at that point. That's when we start seeing plant death is with a lot of bare ground because they've gone broken dormancy so many times because our winters are just, you know, January and then it's winter in February. So it's too erratic for our plants to really adjust to right now. That's why the mulch cover is important in the fall specifically. And then other things? Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it.